Welcome, friends, and happy Friday. It is September the 26th. This is Hurricane Hub Live. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandages, and boy, we've got another jam-packed show for you tonight on HHL. Very active in the Atlantic Basin, where we've got Humberto that has actually already overperformed. When we talked last night, Humberto was just a tropical storm. Today, it's a major Category 3 storm. The track put out last night had it becoming a hurricane this afternoon. Yeah, it's overperformed for sure. Cat 3 ahead of schedule. And now we have PTC number 9, potential tropical cyclone. That's the precursor to Imelda that will likely bring impacts to portions of the southeast U.S. And it is a complicated forecast going forward. There's a lot of variables in play here, and the big wild card is going to be Humberto. It's overperforming now. How much of an influence does Humberto have on future Imelda? That will be a big deciding factor on how big the impacts are and how prolonged they are in the southeast United States. But right now, looking more likely for impacts to come to the Carolinas. Notice how I said impacts. That doesn't necessarily mean a landfall. And I'll show you what I mean here with the latest computer models here in just a couple of minutes. So we did get our third hurricane of the season today. And usually on average, that occurs around September the 7th, so about 3 weeks behind there. We also got our third major hurricane today, about a month ahead of schedule. When you refer to climatology here, typically we find that on October the 28th. And in a normal or average season, we only see about 3 major hurricanes. And we're already there. Interesting to see how the season has got more active over the last week. All right, there's a look at Humberto. Again, a Category 3 major right now. Gabrielle, no longer any advisories being put out on that. And then we've got here PTC number 9. We'll start with Humberto, though, the more ominous storm, the strongest of the storms out there right now. We're up to 115 mile-per-hour winds. That puts it firmly into a Category 3 major hurricane status. Since it has already overperformed, I wouldn't doubt if this thing makes a run at Category 5. It just goes to show you, under ideal environmental conditions, storms could really take advantage of it and really just wring out all of that energy that's currently available in the atmosphere here. And it's not done intensifying just yet. Notice how slow it is moving. West-northwest at 5. So it's creeping along. Does that remind you of another storm? Yeah, Aaron. Same general area, just slightly off to the north and east. Aaron made its jump from Cat 1 to Cat 5 in this same general part of the southwest Atlantic. And who knows, we may see Humberto climb above a Cat 4 and become a Cat 5. Here's a close-up look on infrared satellite imagery. And in the last couple frames here, it's really kind of taking on an annular look, a buzzsaw appearance on satellite imagery here with a very well-defined eye. And just look at that convection wrapping around that center, that eye wall there, very well-defined. And there's no real signal that an eye wall replacement cycle is anywhere soon. That would act to likely weaken it or plateau its intensity for a little while, but I think we're still on an intensification train here, and we'll see what the 11 o'clock advisory shows in terms of a jump in intensity here. Let's switch things up and show you the visible satellite imagery, because this is very impressive. Look at the spiraling out with a perfect outflow. It is ventilating very properly, and that's a big reason why it's intensified so quickly out there. We've got outflow aloft, nice inflow, pulling in some of that deep tropical moisture there, and it has effectively walled itself off from any dry air intrusions into the overall circulation here. You can see there is plenty of dry air in the mid-levels off to the west and northwest, where it will be heading, and that still is in play. It could ingest some of that dry air that could sputter it along a little bit, but overall likely going to maintain a major hurricane status for several more days as it moves to the north and west. Now, this did achieve rapid intensification, our third storm so far this year, and we are 3 for 3 for hurricanes, becoming major hurricanes in the basin so far. So 5 o'clock yesterday, 60 mile per hour tropical storm. 5 o'clock today, 115 mile per hour Category 3. So in that 24-hour time frame, we jumped 55 miles per hour in its maximum sustained winds, and we dropped 38 millibars in central pressure. Pressure goes down, wind speeds go up, and again, as I mentioned, we're not done intensifying yet. Quick recap on what rapid intensification is. There is a defined criteria for it. At least a 35 mile per hour jump in its sustained winds in a 24-hour window. We saw that, almost doubled it. 1 in 3 storms do undergo rapid intensification. All 3 of our hurricanes did. Most Category 4 and 5 storms see this happening, like we saw this year. And as I mentioned, intensification is still likely because not only is the water below this system very warm, It's very deep. The ocean heat content in its current location and where it's tracking over the next several days remains sufficient, even though it is moving slowly. So the upwelling is mixing up some cooler waters, except the warm water extends down to a depth that it's just upwelling more warm water. So it's almost got an endless fuel source here. As long as the atmospheric conditions remain ideal, it'll continue to take advantage of that warm ocean water here. And if you remember with Erin, same kind of thing when it tracked through here, and then it left a sea surface scar because it just upwelled and replaced so much of that warm water with cooler waters because it was moving so slowly for such a long period of time. And we'll likely see this eventually play out next week when we get the new sea surface temperature maps coming on out and updated. All right, here's a look at the forecast track as of 5 p.m. Again, up to a Cat 4 is the max intensity now expected, 145-mile-per-hour winds. But that can certainly vary. Intensity forecasts are one of the hardest things to do in regards to tropical forecasting. And then it takes a track somewhat similar to what we saw with Erin. And for reference, here's Erin's track. It did move farther to the south and west there. So this is almost just dislocated a little farther to the north and east. Now, it does have in the cone there Bermuda. So it will depend on the exact final track here. And if they do see any impacts, they would be on the dirty side of this, so they would still likely see some impacts from this, especially as it gains latitude. It will become a much larger storm, so we'll have to watch for that, but it will be safely off the east coast of the U.S. Much like we saw with Erin, we still had indirect impacts, meaning the swells will propagate out off towards the west, heavy surf, rip current risk, maybe some coastal erosion, higher than normal tides for Humberto. Now, at the same time, we're also going to have Imelda there, so that's going to be an interesting influence on each other's storms here. So here's a look at the models. They're pretty much in line. Okay, these are the ensembles. These are the Euro and the GFS run several different times, tweaking the variables. And most of these, good consensus, pretty much through the duration of the forecast period going out 5 days. A little bit more divergence the farther out you go. That's expected. There's no anomalies, picking it all the way in or making landfall or anything like that. It's pretty clear cut in terms of where Humberto will be tracking here. But as I mentioned, at the same time, we will have Imelda, which currently is PTC 9, potential tropical cyclone. 35-mile-per-hour winds right now. This is basically not quite yet a tropical storm, but it does open up it opens up the National Hurricane Center to put out watches and warnings because it's already impacting populated areas. And also we get a forecast cone now, so we can kind of see where its trajectory is going to be. You don't have to just look at model plots. Currently located here right over the far eastern tip of Cuba. In fact, it might have even threaded the Mona Passage here between Haiti and Cuba. And it's very interesting that this wave has kind of held it together. It's a robust tropical wave because it was moving over the highest elevation in the entire Caribbean. Pico Duarte, located in the Dominican Republic here, highest elevation in the entire basin here. So usually higher elevations work to enact wind shear on the storms and kind of tear it apart. Didn't do that really with what is now PTC 9, soon to be Imelda, and it's starting to take shape here. We are getting a center of circulation developing, moving along the northern coast of Cuba and eventually moving to the northwest. You can see it a little bit better here, some broad circulation on the visible satellite imagery with PTC number 9. And just so you're wondering what PTC it means, potential tropical cyclone, it's something that's relatively new. It was first started in 2017, that hurricane season there, and there's been several PTCs pretty much each season since. And as I mentioned, it's just not fully developed into a tropical storm yet, so they're not giving it a name, but it enables the watches and warnings, which we have some out there, and it helps the public prepare sooner for wind and surge and other impacts, heavy rainfall, flood threat, that kind of thing. So tropical storm watches here in parts of the Bahamas over towards Turks and Caicos, and the northern western portions of the Bahamas have a tropical storm watch, so warning a little more imminent. Conditions there likely in the next 36 hours. A little bit later coming their way in the northern portions of the Bahamas there. U.S. islands, though, nothing, and Florida, not seeing any watches or warnings yet. Here's the forecast track. First track out for PTC 9, soon to be Imelda. Now, it moves pretty much due north, pretty much easy forecast going the next 36 to 48 hours, okay, taking us through the weekend. Pretty much a due north to slightly northwest track. As that happens, it's organizing and intensifying. This is likely, I don't want to say guarantee that it won't intensify quickly or overperform, because it certainly can. We've seen that with most of our storms this season. So take the intensity here with a grain of salt. It may be stronger than forecast. So by Sunday afternoon, we're at a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm as it's building out of the northern Bahamas. It is due east of the east coast of Florida at that point in time, and then it strengthens by Monday to a Category 1 hurricane. Now, it covers a pretty good amount of real estate in the next couple of days, moving at a pretty good pace. And then something interesting happens here on the forecast cone. You can see it plain as day. The far tail end, as you get to 5 days, starts to have this very big lobe, indicating low confidence in the forecast because the storm will be slowing down as it's on approach to the South Carolina or perhaps even North Carolina coastline. And there is a scenario in play here where we see a slowdown and stall, which we've seen happen a lot of times. And when you get a tropical system, perhaps making landfall, perhaps not, but lingering near the coast for days, you get a massive flooding potential. And you also got to think that all this tropical moisture is getting thrown inland, running up against the high orography here, the mountains, the Blue Ridge, the Appalachians, and that's all going to help to wring out that tropical moisture. Again, we're just about, to the day, a year out from the anniversary of Helene that had catastrophic flooding in these same areas. So that's something we're really going to have to pay attention to and be sensitive to over the next several days here as this forecast gets fine-tuned. Now, it's not a slam dunk that this is going to make a landfall. It could linger right along the coastline here, and then the influence of Humberto may tug it back out to sea, which some of the models have begun to signal and agree with more on over the last couple of model runs. Just to give you a look at how the uncertainty is, the low confidence of the forecast once you get to the 5-day time frame, look at the spaghetti plots here. We've got a bunch of them that moves it due west, inland, making a landfall. This is a landfall scenario here with this cluster. And then another cluster that before it even gets to the coast takes a hard right turn and moves due east. Now, why is it getting to this particular area here and hitting that fork in the road and having to make that decision? Not really making a decision. It's going to be forced to do this, either east or west, landfall or no landfall. Well, it has to do with the upper level steering and the dynamics that's going to be in place at that point in time. And I'm going to show you what the models here are looking at globally, and then we'll look at the steering currents. So model comparison between the GFS and the European. GFS in yellow, red is going to be the European. There's Humberto, not signaling much of development yet, and then we start to see it for Imelda here as we get into later in the weekend, early next week. At this point in time, tropical storm may be a Cat 1 hurricane. Pretty good agreement on where it's located. And then we jump out a couple more days. We're approaching landfall of the Carolinas, maybe the Georgia coast by Monday night. And then look at this. We're right there at the coast. Good model agreement, GFS and European here. Notice the wild card, Humberto. Pretty close. Close enough in proximity that I think we see some influence on Imelda. Watch the influence here, both depicted by the GFS and Euro. Tries to make a landfall and then gets pulled offshore. GFS more so than the European. European hangs off the coast here, which is not a good scenario either. This is not much different than if it was just sitting over land. Still going to bring immense amounts of tropical moisture. But GFS scenario a little better, taking the strongest winds, heaviest rain, pulling it away from the coastline. Now, does that remain the case? Now, as the influence of Humberto pulls away, because this is going to be rocketing off to the north and east, watch what happens with the GFS takes Imelda farther out to sea, but the Euro does linger it. All right, so let's look at the steering now. So here's what's going to be in play on Monday. A sprawling or expanding ridge of high pressure. This is the European's depiction here, okay? Coming out of the Great Lakes. We've got Imelda, we've got Humberto. Pretty close proximity, even on the Euro model, as you just saw. Let's jump out up to Tuesday and Wednesday. Tries to build north. That ridge is almost right overhead. So it's going to begin slowing down and then eventually just sitting and stalling somewhere near the South Carolina coastline. When it starts stalling, it could be over land. There could be a landfall, just making landfall and stalling near the coast, or it stalls offshore. As long as it's near the coast, still impacting land, still impacting populated areas. We're talking near Charleston, maybe up to Myrtle Beach, down to Savannah, Hilton Head. Look at how that ridge is really just keeping it capped from building any farther north. And then you still have Humberto there. And then that'll start to try to pull it away. And the Euro lingers back here. Meanwhile, the GFS does tug it a little bit farther off to the east. So that's going to be in play here. I think two factors: how strong that ridge is, and then how close Humberto gets to impart some sort of influence on tugging it away from the coastline there. So very interesting things we're going to have to watch there. Regardless, if it's near the coast and stalling or slowing down, big rainmaker. Catastrophic flooding is a possibility, not set in stone. But here's a look at the preliminary rainfall outlook for the next 7 days. Keep in mind, we do have a precursor rain event underway now with a stalled frontal boundary currently in place along the Carolina coast up to Virginia. And these rainfall totals that we'll see for the next few days are already included in here. But if we do get the scenario that we have Imelda right here, or maybe moving it a little bit farther inland into the Piedmont and stalling for several days, these numbers could easily be doubled, or they could even be tripled if it is stronger than anticipated and lingers for longer than anticipated as well. So just keep that in mind. We'll have to watch that very, very carefully. In terms of the wind threat with this, the wind field is not going to be very large. Now, certainly if it does make landfall, it would be bringing the winds with it, which would be tropical storm force winds, maybe some higher gusts than that. Again, it could overperform and be stronger than that. But I think the biggest hazard, as it looks right now, if we do get a slowdown and stall in the Carolinas, would be the massive amounts of rainfall leading to flooding. So bottom line, Humberto brings indirect U.S. impacts: waves, erosion, rip currents. Growing probability, as you saw, for an impactful flooding event in the Carolinas. Not a guarantee, though. Humberto's influence could swing it out to sea. And I will tell you, on the 18Z runs of both the GFS and Euro, they are in agreement on that being a possibility. Is it the start of a trend, or is it a one-off? We'll see. But that is still in the cards. Landfall is not a sure thing here. All right, folks, coming up after a quick break, we're going to take a look at what's going on in the Eastern Pacific, because there's a hurricane out there as well. We'll see you right after a quick break. All right, folks, welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. And now a check on the Eastern Pacific, where we still have a hurricane, Hurricane Narda, Category 1 at this time. Notice it is nowhere near land. It is forecast to gradually weaken as it builds to the west and northwest and becomes a remnant low. So Hurricane Narda still clocking winds of 90 miles per hour out there in the Eastern Pacific. It was a Cat 2 at its peak. Now, for the first time in a long time, we don't have any other areas of interest that have been tagged out in the Eastern Pacific, meaning the basin is finally quieting down. It has been a blockbuster season out there. They've had, I believe, 14 named storms. In fact, we do have the scorecard. Yeah, 14 named storms out there, 8 of which have been hurricanes, 3 majors. And now the Atlantic has actually tied the Eastern Pacific for 3 major hurricanes. Of course, we're 3 for 3 with our hurricanes that have developed so far this season. And with the development of Imelda, likely in the next 12 hours or 24 hours, we'll be up to 9 named storms out in the basin, still coming in below the projections. But we'll see. The season holds some more to offer. All right, folks. That's the latest tonight on Hurricane Hub Live. I want to invite you to join us back here every night. We're here 7 days a week at 8 p.m. And with it getting more active, you're going to want to check in for the latest out on the tropics. We'll be back here tomorrow night, Evan Stewart at 8 p.m. And on Sunday night, we'll have Hunter Forrest. I'll see you back here on Monday.